Attention forward drivers, welcome to the Channel 19 Experience Trucker Podcast, hosted by Tony. This is where the real stories roll, straight from the blacktop. We're talking trucking life, uncut. The wild stuff, the weird stuff, the mistakes, the memories, and the miles in between. From first jobs to last hauls, the laughs that kept us going, and the lessons that left a mark. You'll hear about what's happening in the world of trucking today, too, from legislation to lane changes in the industry. But more than anything, this show's about bringing back the sense of community we used to find on the CB, especially good old Channel 19. No rants, no corporate spin, just long-form storytelling from someone who's been behind the wheel, built the fleet, hit rock bottom, and climbed right back up. It's by truckers for truckers. This is the Channel 19 Experience. Let's hit the road.
Paper breaker 19, can I get a radio check? Heard it pretty quiet out here on Channel 19. Well, there's a plain white rapper taking pictures at the state line. Hit the jake brake quick, we ain't paying no fines. The driver swing into the interstate, body shop south at exit 5. Building trucking ain't the same as it was. We're the last of our kind.
I'm your host, Tony, and welcome to the show. It is Sunday, March 30th, and episode number 7. This week's episode is brought to you by TrueTMS. TrueTMS is a cloud-based truck transportation management system. Their product helps streamline order taking, planning, communications with drivers via their free driver app, along with invoicing, payroll, settlements, and reporting. If you need a more efficient way of managing your fleet, take a look at TrueTMS at www.truetms.com. This week on the podcast, in our pre-trip inspection, the FMCSA is having quite a busy time of it lately. So we'll discuss a couple of those topics and also a couple of surprise pieces of legislation to come out this week around the federal excise tax for new equipment, trucks and trailers, and also a potential tax credit for truck drivers that was introduced. On the money line, we'll talk about MATS. It was an amazing show. The weather cooperated nicely. The forecast looked a little dire, but it kind of played out just right with the weather and made for a great show. Also, you might want to sit up straight like we're creeping through a scale and pay close attention. I've got a couple of takes coming out of Matt's and that experience that might get a few people in the back riled up. Heck, some of the people who might get riled up were so far in the back you could say they weren't even there. This week for a guest, I've got Chris Barber, one of the people at the forefront of the Canadian Freedom Convoy back from 2022. He's coming up on a critical juncture in his court case here this coming week, and so we get a chance to talk to him, see where this thing is at, and his thoughts on where it might be headed. And usually I edit the interviews. Usually the discussions go on much longer than what I put in the show. But this time, my plan is to just run the whole thing ungoverned. Don't forget to stick around for the post-trip inspection. I'm a little surprised that I haven't said anything yet that anybody's wanted to chime in and make a comment or dispute a claim or debate me on something. So I guess I'm not trying hard enough yet to get under anyone's saddle. I guess I'll have to try a little harder, and I'll give that a shot later on in the program. So hang on tight. We'll take a quick break here and get that pre-trip inspection in. If you're not driving, it's a great time to like, follow, subscribe, and share the podcast with your friends. We've had an amazing response over the last few weeks, a ton of growth in people following and people listening and people downloading the episodes. I can't thank you enough for that. It's really cool to see. It's really cool to get to meet more of you digitally and hopefully in person at some of the upcoming shows this summer. So let's jump into the show. Trans-Carolina Permits is based out of North Carolina. They've been in business since 1977, and they've got a team with a ton of experience in all of our favorite part of trucking, of course, is the government. They provide a portfolio of services for the trucking industry, various applications and permits, FMCSA authority, 2290s, IRP tags, DMV tags, trailer plates, along with state filings for your business. Overdimensional permits, not to mention they have a compliance program. They'll help you with clearinghouse setup and queries, IFTA, and mileage reporting. So your state by state mileage, your fuel purchase tracking, and get that wrapped up into a nice little bundle for quarterly filings. They're a one-stop shop for your trucking needs. You can find them on Facebook and LinkedIn, or check out their website, transcarolinapermits.com, or give them a call at 1-800-899-4870. All right, grab that safety vest and let's do our pre-trip inspection. Topic number one, the FMCSA finds itself in the hot seat. Speaking of people who have work to do, the FMCSA has had some interesting weeks of late. At the TCA conference a couple weeks ago, the newly appointed FMCSA leader was noticeably absent, which we found out soon thereafter why she had resigned. Then a new leader was announced, Derek Bars, a former head of the Florida Highway Patrol. He got the backing of OOIDA out of the gate, but I think a bunch of sentiment from the closer to the highway level of the trucking community was less than positive. I mean, I think while we're all looking forward to some actual enforcement that's meaningful to us, like fraud, like sketchy or downright illegal CDLs, or people who can't actually meet the requirements for speaking English and aren't being put out of service, it feels like our perspective as drivers, owner operators, and small fleet owners continues to be on the outside trying to fight our way in. Derek Bars comes from the enforcement side. And of course, this is largely an enforcement agency, a regulatory and enforcement agency, but we seem to be lacking a seat at the table. And that's something that should change. The big money still seems to be prevailing. The vested interests in the large organizations that represent the big money still continues to have the loudest and kind of often the only real voice in the industry with these government agencies. I mean, it's not surprising. This is what happens, but let's not forget where the real numbers in this business lie. Yes, we have some massive carriers in the trucking business. When you go look at the numbers of who makes up the bulk of the truck drivers and the truck owners, it is a huge amount of single truck fleets, less than 5 truck fleets, less than 10 truck fleets make up the majority of the trucking capacity in this country. So while the other ones have a condensed hold of capacity and have big numbers and big pockets and deep pockets, we're still the bulk of this industry. But it doesn't really feel like it when we look at the interactions with some of these agencies. There's a problem with enforcement in this country, and I think we all know who's benefiting from that lack of enforcement. It certainly isn't us. When I look at the people in this audience for this podcast and the people who resemble this audience in the industry, the working men and women of the trucking industry, the backbone of this industry, it still looks quite underrepresented and underserved. While at MATS, the FMCSA had some interesting encounters. Some of these sessions are meant to be a little bit more of a dog and pony show and expect some softball questions and get out of Dodge and go hang out your booth and pass out some stickers. But they got some tough questions from some different people and whether they wanted to get them or not. Their session, I didn't make their session on Thursday, but I did see a recording of it. A lot of it was around fraud and some of the regulatory things. Broker transparency, of course, came up as well. Is there any real optimism that they're going to sort this out anytime soon? It seems like the fraudsters are running circles around everybody trying to regulate them. And it's really the small companies, the independent operators that suffer the most, right? Whether that's because it's getting involved in one of these fraudulent claims, ending up on the receiving end of a double brokered load and not getting paid for it. Like, this is a significant amount of your revenue and your margin. And to lose that level of margin in a month, while it doesn't hurt the big fleets, I mean, it stings, right? And they catch more of it. But as a percentage of their revenue, as a percentage of their margin, it's much less catastrophic than it is for the small carriers. And so I think to be sitting here with very little optimism that they're going to figure this out anytime soon. And also, let's not forget the pain of being treated like, as a little carrier, you resemble the people who are doing the fraud, right? No, nobody committing fraud is going out and pretending to be a 30,000 tractor company, right? They're pretending to be largely small companies or independent operators. And they're making it more difficult for people to get loads and to be trusted in the various platforms and the various marketplaces. And so it's really disproportionately, I think, affecting us and even the new carriers, people who are trying to go out on their own for the first time, are really put in a bad spot because you're just assumed to be a high risk, a higher risk than even you were before, let's say 10 years ago or 15 years ago, where you could start up a company and get on the load boards and get some action. Now you're kind of dead in the water. And so it's costing people who are already having a tough go of it some margin and opportunity here. So, it's disappointing that it feels like the fraudsters are in the lead. Hopefully, we can see some progress here. We need to see some meaningful progress. Pink Cheetah drove up all the way from Florida and made it in time for the end of that FMCSA session. Kind of at the end of her questions, she hit him up about her other requests for broker transparency to TQL, which they deflected to the upcoming changes that the comment period just ended about 10 days ago. But I think the thing that frustrated her and frustrates some of the rest of us is, and they proved it on the one case that they've handled for her already, which was they have the authority right now. They recognized the authority, they acknowledged it, and they went and executed on it to get her the rate and what she was owed from the one load that she hauled for TQL. So why does this continue to be a problem to get them to continue to utilize tools that they already have? You don't have to wait for the next round. Yes, the next round will make it easier and less work for you, FMCSA, but that doesn't mean you can just sit on your hands and shouldn't get out there and be enforcing this right now. Send them a message that there's a new sheriff in town and there's a new way of going about this, and we're not going to put up with you just subverting regulations because you can and because it's not going to get enforced. We've got a pattern in Washington, and we've had it for quite some time, where we've got a bunch of people who look to make new rules. Meanwhile, a bunch of existing rules sit on the books and collect dust, and they're never enforced. We've got thousands of existing laws and regulations. This isn't just about trucking. This is in a lot of industries and a lot of parts of our lives where there's just rule after rule after rule. Nobody enforces any of them. Then they stand around and pontificate about all the problems that we have and then talk about the new rule that they're going to make that's going to save the day. Why not start enforcing some of the hundreds and thousands of laws that you already got on the books or regulations? So maybe Doge and Elon should put a team on that. If we're not enforcing a rule, well, let's get it off the books then. If you don't want to enforce it, what's the point of having it? Pink Cheetah also asked several questions about systems and the problems that people are having right now in those current systems. There's new systems coming for some of this stuff, right? The MC numbers going away this fall. I forget the date. But also this week, a woman by the name of Erica Wilson of Wilson Transportation Services, she made a long post on Facebook. Go check it out on her page, Erica Wilson or Wilson Transportation Services. And she talked about debating whether she should even go up to the FMCSA booth at Matt's or not. And she couldn't pass up the opportunity to go and try to do what was right by her clients and speak to them. And surprise, surprise, it didn't go well. They weren't, and this is her perspective, and I wasn't there, but her perspective was they weren't really interested in what she had to say. We've got a problem with elected people in this country and unelected people in the bureaucracy that are not listening to us. Their systems are inadequate. Some could say they suck. Erica outlines a bunch of these systems and the problems that she's facing for some of her clients, which are problems that all of us are facing too in a variety of ways. When you have more clients and you're trying to help a group of people, you encounter it more frequently than some of us who have to do it once a year, once every 2 years, things like that. So we just suck it up. But other people are having these problems too, and these systems are broken. And I know the FMCSA wants to punt, and believe me, I was in the software business. If your best answer is, well, the next update will make it better. Don't worry, just sit back and wait. But we know, right? These systems have been a mess all along. So once again, do we have any confidence that the next system is going to be better? And it was well thought out. Do you remember all the conversations that they came to all of us with all the problems and said, hey, we'd really like your input on what would make this better? I don't recall a lot of those conversations, and neither do a lot of the people I know. So who's actually designing these systems? And are they actually going to solve any problems? The systems are broken, and Erica does a great job of outlining a bunch of the problems. But the reality is those problems are dealt with like there are problems to figure out, not their problems. Like we seem to have a strange paradigm where we're not viewed as the customers here, and their customer service is not very good. You can't get the help that you need. Most of this stuff is worded in governmentese, which is hard to understand if you don't speak it fluently. And also, based on the conversations, the video I saw when Pink Cheetah was at the meeting, based on Erica's comments, and based on other people's feedback that I trust, their hearing doesn't seem to work very good either. There's no accountability to us, the people who move the freight. And we don't have an army of people at our disposal to go and fight through this nonsense and deal with all these inefficiencies. We need to be able to go in, get what we need, provide what's required of us, and get on with the thing that we do best, which is move freight. Elon and his crew over at the Doge, maybe it's time for an out-of-frame overhaul on this thing. Replacing the filters didn't work. It needs a serious overhaul, both in systems and in the spirit of helping us be successful, not feeling like we're some problem that must be dealt with. So moving on to topic 2, the federal excise tax. A bill was introduced again to eliminate the federal excise tax, which is the tax charged on large equipment purchases, trucks, trailers. And my brother and I, we were just talking about this not even a week ago. We're looking at buying a couple new trailers, and we were discussing the federal excise tax and lamenting it, right? Of course, every time you buy something new in this country, you get tagged with 12% excise tax on every new truck or trailer. It was a tax. By now, everybody should know if you've read any articles, right? This tax was put in place in like 1917 to help pay for World War I. So it's been on the books for 107, 108 years now. So surely I would hope we've paid off our debts to World War I by now. But of course, our government isn't one to let a good chunk of money go easily. So here we are again with another attempt to get rid of this nonsense. And of course, our discussions between my brother and I immediately went to, well, maybe we should wait. Maybe we should, why pay the 12% now and find out 3 months from now we could have saved 12%. I mean, when you look at it, right, the press releases that came out, the ATA is behind it. So, and they're in there quoted multiple times of, the little carriers, the small carriers, we're here looking out for the little guys. And then they throw in some taglines like, not to mention, think of the cleaner emissions if we replace all these older trucks. And of course, there's a manufacturing angle, right? We've seen recently where some of the truck OEMs have laid off shifts at their plants because there's not a lot of orders. The freight market's tough, rates are tough. People aren't buying new trucks, so they're putting some shifts to rest for a while at these assembly plants. So of course there's this will help manufacturing if we drop this tax and basically knock the price down 12%. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. I mean, when they talk about cleaner emissions, they're talking about like, well, think of all the older trucks that would come off the road, kind of like the Cash for Clunkers program during the Obama administration. But let's face facts, like who's running a lot of these older trucks? We've got port guys, we've got farmers, we've got some of the new entrants from around the world in the trucking space. Do we really think they're going to go out and buy new trucks? I mean, most farmers run those trucks seasonally. The pork guys run them locally so they can afford to use older trucks because they don't have to worry about dealing with a repair 1,000 miles from home. They just tow it back to the yard or deal with it locally. And then we've got the new guys running around doing Amazon Relay or, some of these other businesses where, or let's say lines of business where a new entrant is, you can't afford to be buying brand new tractors at 170, 200, $250,000, even if you get a 12% discount and hauling freight like that, especially if you're new and no matter where you're from, right? When I was starting out, I talked about it with Danger Dave on episode 1, right? Where my first truck was a 10-year-old truck with more than 1 million miles on it. And that's what I could afford to get started with. So I don't think people with trucks built before 2010 and some of the emissions requirements are going to just get taken off the road because you can get a new T680 for 12% less. Like that's not how it works. But I mean, this is how they pitch these bills. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to fight them on their debate of whether we should have the FET or not, right? It should have been gone 80 years ago, but this has been harming manufacturing for 100 years, and that hasn't seemed to win the debate. Now, we know there's more gamesmanship behind this tax over the years and also more gamesmanship to come to get it over the finish line if it ever does. My brother and I aren't holding our breath. We're going to continue on with our purchase and eat the tax again. I haven't been able to find the wording on the bill yet, or at least I couldn't find this version. So who knows what pork's in it or other nonsense has gotten added. Maybe a couple statues somewhere around for some famous politicians. But it feels like it's going to turn into the typical trucking situation of hurry up and wait, right? We got a press release, but something actually happens seems like it's going to be quite a ways down the road. So do what's best for you in the short run. If you're looking at new equipment, who knows if they make this retroactive back to some earlier date, like the first of the year or something like that. Nobody knows at this point, at least not that I could gather. So on to the next legislative item, the tax credit. So another one they threw out us this week was a bill proposing a $7,500 tax credit for truck drivers. You have to work so many hours a year, which for most truck drivers is like almost comical. We can make it to 1,900 hours worked. And luckily we have ELDs that keep track of all these fun things for us. So it should be relatively easy to produce for most people. Who knows? But at face value, who can argue with a tax credit? It's interesting timing to me that as the heat is growing on a number of items in the government and in transportation, that here comes the press release for we're gonna get you guys a tax credit and gals. And not to look a gift horse in the mouth here, but maybe just fix some of the other issues that are suppressing our ability to make a decent living. And we don't have to make another exception to our already lengthy tax code. I mean, this is why we have tens of thousands of pages in the tax code already, because everybody needed an exception to offset for something else that was screwy. They love these press releases. There's photos, there's quotes, there's acronyms, and all the people who support it. Can someone over there in Washington just produce a result on something? Because we've about had enough of press releases and being told what you're going to accomplish. Maybe go produce a result that's in our favor and then maybe get excited about it. We'll see how this turns out. Somehow this feels like subterfuge or misdirection for something else that we're not going to like, right? Or maybe it's to make us feel better about this tariff circus that's not doing us any favors right now. I keep reaching out to these legislators. I stopped naming them after I reached out to the first couple rounds and nobody even writes back to you to even acknowledge that you exist. So I'm not going to give you credit for a press release and a bill that you put forth. How about we'll withhold our kudos and congratulations and adulation for your hard work, senators and congressmen and women, for when you actually deliver one of these bills. Then we'll gladly put your name beside it and talk about how great it was that you put it forth. But let's hold our applause until we actually see some results from these folks. But I'll keep trying to reach out to them. I keep sending a message. I send messages every week to I don't know how many congressmen and senators, to no avail thus far. But we'll also get some bigger voices on the program here That was one of the good things about Matt's. I got an opportunity to meet a lot of people interested in coming on the podcast, sharing what they're hearing, what they're learning, and what they're doing. Folks like Americans Truckers United. They were one of the busier booths over there at Matt's, and I talked to them for quite a bit. Check them out on social media. They're not hard to find. They're loud and they seem to have some staying power to them. So we'll get folks like them on the program here soon and see what they're able to get out of these legislators, both at the state and the national level. Well, that's our pre-trip for the day. Get that seat adjusted. Let's push the buttons in and get this rig rolling. We've got work to do.
It's by truckers for truckers. This is the Channel 19 Experience. Let's hit the road.
Welcome back. Let's drop down to line 3 and knock out the money line this week. This week's money line is all about Matt's. I got one topic, Matt's, the Mid-American Truck Show. What an amazing experience. So many wonderful people that I met there. And yes, there was plenty of chrome, there was plenty of lights, there was black smoke, there was diesel fumes, there was people revving up engines and dropping the Jake brake on them in the parking lot. The concerts were great. All that stuff was fantastic, but it was the people for me that really made it so amazing. It's funny, and I talked about it on a couple different episodes. I was at the TCA conference in Phoenix a couple weeks back. And what are the difference between the two atmospheres? I mean, the exhibition hall at TCA, it's open for a couple hours every day, and it was mostly quiet. At Matt's, it is wall-to-wall humanity. From when you check that badge in at the door and walk through, it is a sea of steel and chrome and people and kids and hover rounds and scooters, you name it, and wall to wall, east to west, north to south, around the corner, all the wings of that place, which is massive. The only thing I can really compare it to is my one trip to Disney World, or maybe the Mall of America around Christmas time up in Minnesota, where it's hard to even move at times. I made one trip to Disney World with my family maybe 13, 14 years ago. Well, I'm not sure my wife would qualify me as having visited Disney World. I lasted about 30 minutes and I had had enough with the crowds and the people running into your ankles with their scooters and their hover rounds and just the horde of people with no kids whatsoever everywhere, and me scratching my head going, why am I getting my feet run over by somebody who's 65 and doesn't have any kids in tow with them whatsoever? But anyway, to each their own. So Matt's, they had plenty of that going on too, right? I mean, it was a challenge to get from A to B. It was a busy place. The afternoons were a little bit lighter as people kind of tended to either wander around after lunch and or head outside when the weather was great and look at the trucks and check out the outdoor booths and exhibits and all the various trucks out in the parking lot. And frankly, yes, it was difficult to get around, but when you're at a trucking show with truckers and you have to go a little bit slower because there's some retired trucker who's in a scooter because he's paid his dues with his body and his time, or you've got a family there with their kids pulling a wagon and three little ones. It's a lot easier than being at Disney World, I can tell you that, to appreciate the people who have paid their dues in this business or are paying their dues in this business, and having a lot more patience than I did at Disney World, that's for sure. But it's a sea of people there and booths and food and noise, and it was just fantastic. Now, the debate on if I had ever been to Matt's or not has been pretty much settled. I seem to have lost that battle. There seems to be enough witnesses and circumstantial evidence, and it sounds like there's even hard evidence that my mom and little brother Trucker are whipping out, so I'll stand corrected on this one. And I do kind of vaguely now, with enough prodding, I remember going downtown Louisville and seeing that giant Louisville Slugger bat a long time ago, and I don't know when else I would have been downtown on foot next to a giant bat if it wouldn't have been at Matt's. So I guess I was there in 1999, 25 years for me. And one of the feelings I walked away from Matt's was like, what the heck have I been doing for 25 years that it took me that long to get back here? It's really a mistake on my part. So I spent a lot of time visiting with vendors, meeting some people who had heard of the show. People coming up to me, which is really bizarre to hear my name called out and someone come up and say hi, and I have no idea who they are, and they're not trying to sell me anything, which you kind of expect, but you don't expect them to know your name when you're walking by the booth. So that was really cool. Got to hand out some gear. There were tons of kids there, which was great to see. I can't really list all the people that I met, but you'll be hearing from them in the upcoming weeks as we talk about what they do, how they're connected to the trucking industry, and we get an opportunity to hear some of their insights on their various areas of expertise. I'm not going to turn this into an infomercial because I don't want it to be one, but there are people who care about us, and there are people who know their spectrum of this industry, and it's okay to listen to them share those perspectives and help us understand either things that we don't know how it works or the details of how it works or something we may be completely oblivious to altogether. So we'll round some of those folks up over the coming episodes and have an opportunity to share what they have to share with us. One group that I wanted to call out that I got to meet with was the Copy Southbound podcast. They're trucking guys out of Australia, and they have a podcast. And they also run the Sydney Truck Fest truck show coming up again next year down there just outside of Sydney, Australia. We'd been talking for a bit on social media, and they produced a book here recently. I'll put a picture up of it in Facebook, and I'd asked them if it was available to ship to the US, and they said no, they couldn't do that. And so they brought me a copy, and we met up. We swapped out some gear with each other. And yeah, I don't think there's any tariffs in play with Australia right now. And we just traded goods for goods. I don't know how all these tariff rules work, but I'm hoping we didn't run amok of any tariff problems here. But they were fantastic guys. And I can't express how excited I am to collaborate with them in the future. Little brother trucker and I have been talking about a trip to the Outback for years. And now we've mutually promised to each other that next year is the year we're going to go down. We're going to visit Sydney Truck Fest, find some of these sweet Australian rigs and climb on them and see what they're all about. And who knows, maybe we can turn this into a Channel 19 experience armada heading to Australia next year. So overall, incredible execution by the Mats team on a great show. And what a difference between the shows that I'm used to going to, right? I've made the rounds for years with the TCA shows and the ATA shows and Trimble's Insight show and McLeod's show. I've probably been to most all of them over the last 12 years, a bunch of them 10 or more times. And the energy, the conversations, the volume of people is night and day. And now here's the part where I may piss some people off, because what was most noticeable to me when I was thinking about it on the third day was who wasn't there. And I had to go back through the guidebook to make sure I didn't just miss them, because there's a lot there and you can miss a lot, right? So I had to go back through the guidebook to make sure I didn't just miss them, and I didn't. And this is a little bit, I'm going to condemn myself here as well. This is a little bit of the pot calling the kettle black, since I haven't been there in 25 years. But I'm going to do it anyways. There were a ton of vendors to the trucking industry who weren't there. They didn't have a booth. They didn't advertise anywhere on anything. And it really irked me that they weren't present. This is essentially the World's Fair for trucking. Now, there's lots of other fairs, don't get me wrong, but this is the biggest one for truckers and the people like us, the small truckers, drivers, owner operators, small fleet owners. I'm not going to name names. They know who they are. You know who they are. And I know, since I happen to work for some of them who weren't there, that they spend a crap load of money on advertising and going to other shows and things like that. And that's not to say that they don't do anything. Most of them support things like Driver Appreciation Week and various trucking charities and Reefs Across America and Truckers for Trafficking, Women in Trucking, those types of organizations. So they do things. And I had asked the TCA a couple weeks back. I went to a lot of booths and I said, because knowing that I was going to be at Matt's, of course, I was like, hey, are you guys going to be there? And the answer was almost universally no, which was bizarre to me at the time when I was hearing it. But I withheld my judgment because I wanted to go see it for myself. These companies that weren't there also spend a ton of money on market research, surveys, customer advisory boards, product advisory councils, a bunch of acronyms for this sort of thing that basically says, what do our customers want? What do our users want? How do they want it to work? Things like that. So they're making the investment trying to come up with these answers. And I get it, right? Surely they wouldn't sign many deals of the types of deals they're looking for at Matt's. But that's not the point. The point is to show up and pay your respects to the industry and the drivers that make this thing go around. Don't just go to these other shows where there isn't hardly an owner operator or actual driver to be found at most of them, other than when they bring them up and do award ceremonies, which are great, right? Don't get me wrong. I don't want to put a slight on some of that stuff, but there's not many drivers in any of these other shows. They don't go, they don't get invited. But at these other shows, there's lots of conversations about drivers and driver concerns and drivers' opinions and driver feedback. Why not just go show up at the shows where the drivers are at? Buy ads at things like Matt's. Spend some of your money showing that you care at Matt's and the other shows like Matt's, like Walcott or Florida, Texas, California truck shows that are like similar in audience. Stop just looking for what is in it for you as a business from a sales standpoint. And if you need to justify why go and why spend the money, other than being good partners and supporting truckers where they are, which is plenty enough reason in its own right, send your product and marketing teams. Hell, leave your salespeople at home or bring some of your customer support or training people, because a ton of your end users are at these shows. And you don't have to spend nearly as much money as you're spending right now looking to find drivers and owner operators and small fleet owners to get their opinions. You put a booth up and you put your brand name up on it, they're going to come find you. Now, you may not like all of what they have to say, but you'll definitely learn something valuable in the process. And the other thing you're going to get out of it is you'll probably earn a bunch of respect from the people who you earn their respect by showing up and meeting them face to face. But really what was most important to me, that bugged me, was not being there just to pay your respects. And bring a little bit of your money and help contribute to making Matt's and the shows like Matt's the best they can be for the people that they're for. These companies fund paying for bands and entertainment for executives at these other shows. Do the same for the men and women who get the real work done in this business every day behind the wheel of those trucks that you want to strap your latest gadgets to. One of the fun things in my last 12 or so years not being behind the wheel of a truck has been being in meetings where I'm the only former truck driver around the table, or on a Zoom meeting. When introductions are being made on these meetings, I usually start off with, well, I'm Tony, and I grew up in trucking, and then I was a truck driver, and then I was an owner-operator, and then I was a small fleet owner. And that usually gets met with a bunch of surprise, because I'm the only one there with that kind of background in a lot of these meetings. And then also I go to explain, and I've also worked for a bunch of other people in this business. I've been a planner. I've been a fleet manager. I know my hours of service. I know some of the regulations. Some of the regulations I know better by figuring out how to get around them than following them, but that's a different story. But in those meetings, because of that background, I get afforded a measure of respect because of those experiences. Now imagine the value these companies could gain by showing up at some place like Matt's if they're willing to afford me and my one person's experience. Granted, it's a diverse set of experiences. There's way more to the story than just my story when it comes to the trucking industry. Imagine the value they could get if they showed up and actually were willing to listen to those stories as well. Now, maybe it hurts some feelings to be called out like this. Best case scenario, maybe it's a wake-up call and a call to action for some folks who've been on the fence about why to go to Matt's and these other shows. So maybe they'll do better and be present and support all of you for what you do every day and understand the other part of the value that you bring to them, not just by selling stuff to the company you work for or are leased onto. Time will tell. That's it for the money line this week. Let's drop it down to line 4 for a quick break, and then we'll jump into this week's interview with Chris Barber. It is tax season. And truckers, you know your math doesn't math very well, especially now since ELDs got into the picture. Some of us used to be able to do a little bit of math when it came to doing our recaps and understanding how many hours we had left, but since we've had ELDs for a while now, some of our math skills are rusty. So hire a professional to help you with your taxes. Tax Mommy Jackie has a CDL, she's got a hazmat endorsement, and she's also licensed with the IRS to do people's taxes. She understands trucking, she understands deductions and how to maximize all the advantages that the tax code will allow for your business and for your personal taxes. She's affordable. She meets you where you are when it comes to cost. She's not just in it to rack up a bunch of fees. You can reach her on social media, and also her phone number and contact information is on our website at channel19experience.com. All right, so we've got a special guest today, Chris Barber from up in Canada, to talk a little bit about where he's at with his court case and this backstory behind it. So welcome, Chris. Thanks for joining the program.
Thanks for having me, Tony. It's good to be here.
My question really kind of starts a little bit. Of course, I'm curious just from being a former trucker and understanding like what was the beginning like, right? Of, how it got started and also kind of what your thoughts and expectations were as you were driving. I don't know how many miles it is from where you started to Ottawa, but that's a lot of time to think about what's going to happen.
Well, I think it started for me through the mandates and the COVID vaccine regulations. In Canada, we had it quite tough. We were, as a trucker, a long haul trucker, through COVID when it started, the media, the governments, it kind of scared everybody into this false sense that the world was falling around us. And I remember trucking in those days too, and there was no traffic on the highways. It was just us long haul guys. But with that came some of the challenges that we had as drivers too, where we were, we didn't have a place to eat, or use the facilities, or shower. Everything was closed. Everything was closed, and we were standing in drive-through lineups at McDonald's, or up here we have our classic Tim Hortons. And so as truckers, we'd be stopped and we'd stand in the drive-through lineups with the cars just to get our cup of coffee in the morning or something to eat. And man, it was pretty tough. We remember doing it for a few weeks, and I came home and I said to my wife, I'm like, I don't know if I could do this. Like, I had been out here for 30 years, and the amenities are completely gone, and you're left to eating cans of soup in the bunk of your truck out of a microwave. And I don't know about you, but I'm at the age now in my trucking career that at the end of the day, I want to shut the key off and I want to go into a restaurant, have a meal and a beer, or, coffee or whatever it may be, and bullshit with the guy next to me. And that was gone. So it took all the fun out of trucking for me. But I carried on because I usually can't sit around too long. So I spent about a week at home, and I hit the road again trucking. And it just seems like the mandates would never stop. And as a Canadian driver that crosses into the US all the time, I noticed once I got across the border there, the mandates in North Dakota were completely different compared to Saskatchewan and the province that I live. And more regulations and more mandates were coming into effect. And it just seemed like it was a constant. They kept saying, we're going to take this, we'll release the mandates at a such and such day, and then that day would never come. And then came the vaccinations and those forced vaccinations. And my wife dealt with it, my parents, myself, and when the federal government in Canada implemented the cross-border travel mandates for commercial vehicle drivers, that one stung. And I remember being very angry. And leading up to that too, we had the COVID vaccine passport that we had to, we required that passport to enter a restaurant or any facility in Canada. And it was too much. And I remember January 7th, I did a social media post in Jamestown, North Dakota. I just left Applebee's. I had a couple beer in me and I was, fired up, and I did a viral post, and I just said, this is enough. Like, when are we going to stand up to this stuff? We need to start doing something. And then it was kind of with other people that were planning too as well. I'm not taking any credit on my, I had something to do with it. I had my platform that I promoted it on. I was the trucker out of the group, I guess. And it kind of went viral from there. And then we kind of networked with a group of people across Canada that were feeling the same way as I was. And Freedom Convoy 2022 was born from there. So I think it was about 3 weeks after the video that I did, we were rolling. I live in Western Canada. There's a bunch of provinces between here and our parliament system in our Ottawa, Ontario. And we lined up, and in the morning we set sail. It was emotional to say the least. The highways were adorned with people, promoting, just supporting, and we've seen the Canadian flag come back again. I guess people found pride in that Canadian flag. I mean, there's some points that we had 30 miles of traffic behind us in a convoy. It was world's longest convoy, and I'm pretty proud to have been the one that led it.
Yeah, that's pretty phenomenal. So you're saying it was not just trucker instigated, but the convoy became kind of the spearhead.
It did. People rallied behind the truckers, and the truckers have been kind of notorious now ever since then in Canada for taking that stand. But it wasn't just the truckers that took part in the protest. It was, your blue collar workers, your business people. It was everybody. In Ottawa, we had estimated over 100,000 people on Parliament grounds on the first weekend we were there. There was have been hundreds of thousands of people that adorned the highways across there. It was just a Canadian movement of just people that had had enough of government mandates. In our federal government was talking about implementing interprovincial check stops for COVID vaccine passports. There was actually parts of Canada that you couldn't come and go unless you had some of the maritime provinces in the eastern Canada had check stops set up, and they wanted to implement those across Canada. So we decided to take a stand, and we really showed a few people.
Yeah, for sure. So what was it like along the journey? Like when you guys left, like what were your expectations for like how does this story end once you get to Ottawa and then what?
Well, we had a tyrannical-ish sort of prime minister, as most people know. Justin Trudeau is an ego-driven narcissist who doesn't like anyone that challenges his authority. So Justin Trudeau messaged to the media right off the bat that and we found this out through the public emergency. We had a public emergency order commission less than a year after Convoy, where we all had to go to Ottawa and testify in front of a whole group of people. And we found out through that that Justin Trudeau's government decided they were going to message to the Canadian people using propaganda, the liberal media up in Canada here, that the truckers were a bunch of white supremacist terrorists, misogynists. They called us about everything in the book, racist. And that's exactly what Justin Trudeau's motto was right from the time those trucks started rolling, was that he wasn't going to deal with us. He wasn't going to talk to us. He wasn't going to honor anything. He didn't feel like he needed to. And when we got to Ottawa, it was a stalemate. We decided then, and we heard from so many people across the country that begged us and said, don't leave until the mandates are lifted. Don't leave us, please. And so we rolled into Ottawa with that sentiment, thinking that, what, there's been so many people out there that ask for a change, and we're not going to let them down. So it became necessarily a stalemate between the government, who didn't want to listen to us, who called us names, belittled us, and tried to turn people against us. That it was just there. You're going to either speak to us. We didn't drive all the way across the country to come here just to have, turn around and go home. So we pitted in for the long haul. We worked with police on a daily basis to make sure emergency lanes were open throughout the downtown core of Ottawa. Of course, they called it the red zone, but it was a small portion of the downtown area that was essentially a protest. So we did our best to mitigate. Let me just mute that phone so it doesn't start making noise. We worked with law enforcement. We worked with government officials. We did our best to try and come to a resolution where we felt like we were being heard, and we wanted them to listen. And the government doubled down on it. The government wouldn't relinquish anything to us, and essentially enabled the Emergencies Act, which is the War Measures Act, on us. They brought the stormtroopers in, and they beat innocent Canadian protesters in front of our Parliament Hill. Tear gas, rubber bullets. There's videos out there. The horses, they used horses, and there's actually two people that were pretty badly injured when they got ran over by a stampede of police horses. They threw me in jail on February 17th, 2022. I was incarcerated, thrown in a drunk tank for 26 hours. And I was granted bail at $120,000 in bail. I was charged with mischief, intimidation, and going against a court order. And I have 4 counseling orders on top of that. So I've spent the last 3 years of my life buried in lawfare in this country. The government said that they were going to punish anyone who was involved with it to the fullest extent of the law, and that's what they've been doing. So we also have a $290 million lawsuit against us from citizens of Ottawa because allegedly somebody blew a horn and you know. So that's what we've been dealing with up here. Our trial started September 5th of 2023 for mischief, and it ended at the end of August 2024. And we've been waiting little over 6 months now for a verdict from our trial that took over a year. And we will get that verdict on Thursday, April 3rd. So I will speak to you now. I will jump on a plane in a few days, and I will fly out to the beautiful city of Ottawa and get this verdict we're anxiously awaiting for.
Yeah. So what was it like during that 3 week span there? While, you said that there was a big crowd at the outset, and then what were the next couple of weeks like?
The next couple of weeks were probably the most patriotic and fun-loving, just joyous. Okay, I have never been I'm not a protester, I'm not an activist, but for 3 weeks we fed the homeless, we shoveled sidewalks, we became a community again, and we found our Canadian flag again, and we stood proud. We had soup kitchens, we had it was dance parties. It was there was a stage set up there where we could go speak to the people, and just every weekend on the Thursday and the Friday of every weekend coming up, it would just get so busy. A lot of more people would show up. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday was kind of quiet there for the 3 weeks, and then the weekend was just a collective group of people coming together, just wanting to celebrate the fact that these mandates we were standing against the mandates and wanting our lives back, and it was the most peaceful experience that I've ever been a part of in my life. It was there's always been a divide in Canada between Eastern Canada and Western Canada. And a lot of
Yeah.
times the West doesn't feel like they're heard by the East, and the East likes to, that's where our parliament is. So for those 3 weeks, we crossed that divide. We had people from the East Coast or Ontario, standing there hugging somebody from the West, or, it was just a huge movement of peace and love. A lot of hugs, a lot of handshakes. It was stories, it was tears. I can't tell you how many Canadians cried on my shoulder when you meet them from nowhere. I'm just a trucker that just threw a video out there, and the next thing you know, I'm involved in this movement that's, basically worldwide. We're having Canadian flags flown in other countries all over, just standing in solidarity with us. We had the French farmers, they stood, the Dutch farmers, they were huge in their protest, and it was all kind of orchestrated and started because of the Canadian truckers. So
What was the response from the people who lived locally around the capital there?
for the most part, anyone that left their apartment or their house and came out on the street and seen the atmosphere of the people, that was a positive thing. A lot of people actually came just to see for themselves. They didn't believe what the media was saying.
Hmm.
And of course, you have those people that, there's a certain entitlement in this country. And, we had somebody testify at us at a court trial that he had to walk his son 4 blocks to get to the hockey tournament that he was supposed to be part of. And that was a big inconvenience where, I had a vehicle there, a rented vehicle, and we drove all around the city. So it definitely inconvenienced a number of people for the first 3 days of convoy. When we got to Ottawa, it was, we tried our best to get people to lay off the horns, realize that you're in a downtown core. There is people that live here, and that was one of our biggest things. The police actually led us on the convoy into the downtown core, and for some reason, then decided to blockade us in there with concrete. Well, at first, it was actually snowplow trucks and payloaders. They kind of basically just came in and parked the truck so you couldn't move anywhere. And then, of course, they owned the media, so they made it sound like, well, there was a big, blockade or insurrection, which wasn't the case. It was a bunch of people that were just wanting to be involved with the protests, getting as close as they could, and a few people wound up in the residential areas. So after that happened, it was all about trying to mitigate people and, do our best to get them out of the areas that were hard, that were, congested. So we did our best to try and figure that out.
Yeah. Now, I can't recall if it was at the same time or near the same time when there were some blockades of like I think it was the bridge over in Windsor. Was that co connected with you guys, or was that a different group organizing that, or?
It actually wasn't part of the original group, and it wasn't even really a group. It was just a bunch of people. But the protest at the Coots border crossing in southern Alberta and the Windsor border crossing were totally different protests, although sparked, I guess, because of the movement. And so those, it is actually illegal to blockade an international border, an international road of trade. And in those cases, we had nothing. We're not part of that. If we wanted to go to the border to blockade the border, we would have went to the border, but that wasn't what we were up against, or trying to accomplish. We wanted to be heard by our federal government, and some people felt like the best place to go was the border, and we felt like the best place to go was right to the Prime Minister's doorstep.
Sure. So what kind of communication was there between the federal government and you guys during that 3 week time span?
There was nothing. They ignored us. They called us names. It was there was nothing. They wouldn't communicate with us. It was actually the city of Ottawa that actually reached out first and tried to negotiate a deal to try and get some trucks moved out of the residential area. We were happier than could be to try and open up some line of communication, and right away it was evident, downtown in the Ottawa downtown court building, not the court building, I guess the city council building. We were able to negotiate, let's get some trucks to the residential area. And it was like, well, finally you ask, like, let's do this. And then immediately the next day, it was February 14th, Valentine's Day. We were moving trucks out of the residential area and trying to find spots for them on Wellington. Wellington is the street that runs right in front of the Parliament. It's a nice wide highway, and what we tried then to do was get those people out of the areas. And in some cases, it was working really well, but we had 72 hours. The original deal was to get trucks out of the residential areas, or cars. There wasn't a lot of trucks, it was more or less cars. And the police backed out on that. They gave us about 4 or 5 hours on the day that we started and the day we agreed, and they pulled it on us right in the middle because we were actually accomplishing something. We were moving people out of the harm's way that they said would have been harm, and they didn't want that. They wanted us to fail. They wanted us to portray us as the horrible people, just so they could pull that media narrative. It was funny. We were getting more coverage from U.S. Newscasts on the positivity of the protest than we were from our own Canadian media, which is, fed financially by the federal government. So it's just another stage of propaganda up here that they use to tell the people what to think.
So they basically kind of walked the storyline into well, we must do something, so here comes Trudeau with the Emergencies Act, and that's how he was gonna
They
play it
did,
out.
yeah. It was kind of ironic when in Canada we have the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is what it's kind of our constitution up here, kind of compared to the U.S. Constitution, and it was founded in 1984, I believe, April of 1984. It was exactly 40 years from the time that the Canadian Charter of Rights was signed into legislation in Canada. Was the month before the truckers and the protests stood up in Canada. And one of the last living signatories for that charter, his name is the Honorable Brian Peckford. He was sitting prime minister or sitting MP at that time, and he was actually in Ottawa with us, standing against the government and the mandates. And Brian was and his wife Carol were with us in one of the hotels when the federal government announced that they were invoking the Emergencies Act, and it was firsthand to see Brian's reaction. The Charter of Canadian Rights that he helped design and wrote and put into legislation was the same charter that the federal government of Canada was stomping on to quash anyone who dared to challenge their authoritarian mandates.
Right. So
Pretty powerful.
what was the mischief? Like what do they claim the foundation of these charges are?
Well, we allegedly hindered people's private possessions or enabled we interfered with with people's daily life, I guess. And so we've been charged. Like I said, I've got 7 indictable offenses. Mischief is usually a summary offense. It's usually a slap on the wrist to fine. But the federal government has been so vicious and vindictive that they've actually labeled us as indictable offenses, and they're seeking 10 years in federal prison for myself and others involved with the convoy as well. And no matter how the decision goes on Thursday, if we're acquitted of all charges, the Crown prosecutor has been pretty, vindictive. They appeal every innocent case that they come across. So, we're not anywhere near done this fight. We'll be in it for quite some time. If we're acquitted of all charges, they will file an appeal against us and we'll be back in the courts. And it seems like they run us through the judges until they find the liberal appointed judge that they find that's going to rule in their favor. So the it's kind of stacked against us. And I know full well when you go against the government that you don't always win, but you can definitely, go down fighting. And that's exactly what we've been doing the last 3 years.
Right. So what do you think? I mean, you're not alone in this, right? So if people have they received verdicts already in these cases? And
There's been a lot of acquittals. A lot of acquittals. There's been a few guilty verdicts. It seemed like the arrest warrants were issued on the 18th of February, and anyone arrested after the 18th was basically found that they were guilty of mischief. I was arrested on the 17th, so they kind of prematurely threw us in jail. And I didn't have a truck in downtown Ottawa. I removed the truck, Big Red. I took it out of downtown Ottawa about February 7th. I couldn't monitor its safety, and Antifa was doing some pretty funky stuff there. So one of the police officers liaison that I was working with kind of said, I want you to take your truck out. And I kind of thought, you know what, I think I can do that. There's a safe place to park it outside where I don't have to worry about it being vandalized. And so when I was arrested in Ottawa, I was just standing there as a Canadian, right? It was my Canadian constitutional right to be there standing in protest. It's kind of funny that every other left-wing organization has the right to protest, and the government seems to, listen compassionately to that. But as soon as you're, a right-wing, conservative kind of guy or movement, I guess, then they don't like that. And so that was their big thing. It was, essentially the West standing up against the East. But what they didn't understand is the majority of Canada came together and wanted to stand. And that was the one thing they had to try and squash us and do whatever they could to shut us down.
yeah. So, I mean, obviously it's been an interesting time over the last since your trial ended, right? With we've had an election in America, we've got a new president in America. You've got a prime minister who resigned in Canada. You've got a new, well, and I don't pretend to know Canadian politics, but you've got basically an interim one, and you're calling, there's an election planned, and with the tariffs and all the other things going back and forth, it's kind of quite a dynamic time between, your politics, our politics, and all the fronting that's going on between, kind of what's now a little bit of political adversaries between the Trump administration and the former Trudeau administration. How do you think
It
that
has.
impacts, you know, the perspective on your case or your thoughts around what the outcome may be?
Well, our trial has definitely been our charges are politically motivated. We're, essentially political prisoners in this country right now. And we know that the strings are being pulled, the puppet strings are being pulled from the federal government or the provincial government in our cases. So I don't know. I think we're too far into the trial now, like with verdict coming up now. If there's a change of government, maybe it'll be different when it comes to an appeal. If there's an acquittal of all charges, maybe they would lay off that and realize it's not in the public's best interest. Um, but we're definitely due for an election up here. We've been under 10 years of the liberal regime. We've watched, an economic housing crisis and inflation, and we have a carbon tax up here. Carbon tax is literally killing and crippling our workforce in Canada right now. It's expensive to buy anything. I'm a huge supporter of Donald Trump. I have stood behind Donald Trump since the day he said he was running for president. I I wish he would slow the rhetoric down a little bit with the tariffs because it's caused a lot of grief and it's enabled the Liberal Party of Canada to gain a few polling points, I guess, with the Canadian people for having somebody to blame for an extra, our carbon cost was going to go up April 1st, 20%. And that would have created more crippling effects to the economy across Canada. But yet, the government has said, we need to be concerned with these 25% tariffs. It's going to kill all sorts of business. And like, there's a lot of sheep, a lot of Canadian sheep up here that just listen to whatever the government says and whatever the media says. And so people are outraged, and we have this elbows up thing that the Liberals are doing, or the people in Canada are doing now, is a symbol of defiance against the tariffs and the Trump administration. I wish they would tone the rhetoric down a little bit. It's not doing anyone any good right now. I know Canada's had some wild tariffs against the U.S. in the dairy industry and all that,
Mm-hmm.
and Canada has taken advantage of the U.S. in many different ways through these tariffs. So for the U.S. to add tariffs back on us, and now we retaliate, and it's not a win for anyone. I understand what Trump is doing. I know he's going to make America great again. He wasn't elected to make Canada great again. He was elected to make the U.S. great again, and you guys needed some fixing down there just as badly as we need some fixing up here, and that just comes from too many years of Democratic slash liberal reign.
Yeah, and even in playing into, the East-West component of the Canadian politics, also because I was involved in some business uh, around automobile manufacture and just getting to learn about how some of the games get played where, taxes going on the mineral-rich provinces and energy, and then some of that money obviously helping to support some of the subsidies for auto manufacturers in Ontario. It all kind of plays into this dynamic too, which is resulting in some of the feeling from the United States side, like, are you really paying, even if there's no tariff, it's a different game that people are playing, to basically taking tax revenues from Western Canada, feeding into the machine in Eastern Canada, and then those, as a result, those cars are coming into America out of Canadian manufacturing facilities, which is also some of the pain of watching our automotive manufacturing jobs in America get slid up to Canada, for example.
Yes. And I mean, the system works well the way it is right now. Ontario is basically a hub for manufacturing for vehicles. It kind of slid across the border from Detroit from back in the day, I guess. And why? I guess administrations on government side, on both sides. Nobody wants to talk about the fact that Canada slapped 100% tariff on, electric vehicles coming out of China. And in retaliation for that, China slapped 100% tariff on our canola exports over to China. So in one sense, you're claiming that Trump is such a bad person, but yet Canada just did what they did to China, and then in return now, the federal government in Canada kicked Western farmers right in the rear end with the canola tariffs, dropping markets on anything. And chickpeas, I believe, and lentils were affected with that as well. So there's this huge problem right now in Canada and North America in total with distraction from the media. Don't look over here, but look over there. And I wake up every morning. I sit in my office when I'm home here, and I have my morning coffee. I do my paperwork for my business, and I watch legacy media in Canada here, and I see the rhetoric that they're throwing at people daily. But my eyes are open to what's going on here, and. Saddens me to see so many people that just hook, line, and sinker fall for whatever the narrative or the distraction is of the day.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see, right, with the, you would have thought with the internet, with some of these other outlets, that maybe there was more of a democratization of the the media, but somehow it's become almost the opposite, right? Where it's now somehow it became more easy to manipulate things, or you could use more subterfuge, and in the same powers that be controlling the messaging when there was only a few media companies seems to be the same way or worse playing out now that we have all these other avenues, and it hasn't gotten better. for anyone, I don't think.
No. I thought we learned something through COVID and how they used the media to, that fear campaigning against just innocent people that were just scared for their livelihoods. And obviously we haven't. I woke up a lot in the last number of years. I've woke my parents up to what's going on around us. Yeah, there's been, and I get countless messages from people across the country that, thanks to the convoy, the trucker convoy, they see what's happening now, and their eyes have been opened to so much different stuff. It's just there needs to be accountability in this country from our elected officials. I think probably on both sides. You guys have quite the issues down there as well. It's definitely popcorn night most days when you're watching, social
Right.
media feeds compared to what the media is telling you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and we're in the, get out the bulldozer stage right now with Elon and the Doge, and
Yep.
I don't know if that's the answer either, but when your answers all seem to be A, you never get the truth about what good or bad is really occurring. It's all just spin, both sides, constant spin. And how much worse is it to knock some of this stuff over than deal with the pain of how it exists today? Like, I don't know. It's really hard to tell. And yeah, it's a challenge for everybody to, even if you really want to know. That's why I think it's great. And, just the fortune of being able to talk to you directly and go, what was your experience? What do you see from your seat? Because that
Mhm.
matters in this day and age of being able to get, somebody who can actually see it from where they're at and not have to take three different people's, you know, handed
Viewpoints, yeah.
off versions of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been quite the eye-opening experience for me. I've never been, I've always been prominent on social media. I have my trucker fans that have always followed me, and I've always kind of a shit disturber on social media. I'm the guy that does a post in the morning and just sits back and loves the comments and the people that come in to hate on you. So having the platform and the name that I have now, I guess that side of me still is a little prominent. All my social media platforms, I still like to kind of poke the bear. I'll look through the comment section. I'll look for the nasty comments to respond to, and yeah, that side of me is still there. I just have to be a little bit more delicate in how I approach it now. I guess there's a lot of people watching, and
Right.
anyone who follows my social media, I was very vocal, very vulgar to the scent too on some of my old posts, and that's one thing when Convoy happened, I realized there's a lot of eyes and there's a lot of young kids watching me. So that was one of the things that I decided no matter what people say to me on social media, I get some pretty harsh and negative and hateful. Like, have been death threats and you name it, and I'll always fight back with humor and mocking, and that's my way to fight them back. But definitely a different experience. I never thought I'd be in that position. I turned the computer on in the office and seen my mug across MSN many times. Kind of put my head down and go on with my day.
Right. Well, Chris, I can't thank you enough for taking some time. You got a lot going on, and our prayers are with you for a good outcome here and a good
Thanks.
outcomes beyond this, because we know it, like you said, it doesn't just end here. Between the civil stuff and appeals and everything else that comes, but we're praying for you and that you get a good
Appreciate it.
outcome, and we're proud of you, as a trucking brother to go and do what you felt like needed to be done and do it in a way that was as respectful as possible and still getting your point across as best you could. It means a lot, right, to
Thank you.
all of us.
One thing's prominent is I'm a truck driver. I'm not an activist and a protester, like I said. So I just did a run from Canada down to Arkansas, and a partial load up to Michigan, and reloaded in Wisconsin. And I came home. I just got back yesterday from that trip, and it was so nice to pull. I drive the big red they call it. It's my Kenworth, the 2003, and I pulled it out of the shop. It's parked for winters now, and I pulled it out of the shop and took it for its spring run, and I couldn't have been happier. It was people yelling at me on the radio and all positive stuff. Like I said, it was just good to get out on the road and stretch my legs. And my old winter beater doesn't go too far from home when I'm home in the wintertime. So when spring comes out, I'll be in the States, barring anything that bad happens for convictions or that on Thursday. I hope I don't lose the right to cross the border, but there's a possibility that I would, that I could. So If everything goes good on Thursday, I will definitely be hitting the road and doing some more long haul trucking across Canada and the US. So that is where I've been the happiest place in my life.
Well, sounds good. If you get down by Phoenix, let's go have a beer
Oh,
together.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, anytime. I usually run the central US for the most part, but you never know. I do get to stretch my legs and go for a drive wherever the customers want me to go normally.
Yep. Well, thanks, Chris. I appreciate your time tonight.
Thanks for having me, Tony.
It's by truckers for truckers. This is the Channel 19 Experience. Let's hit the road.
Welcome back. Quick reminder before we get into the post trip to pay a visit to the friends of the show on social media. I-95 Truckers, they've got a Facebook page. He's got amazing pictures. He takes them out on I-95 and its surrounding area. Really wonderful photographs. There's a ton of posts, ton of pictures, awesome trucks. Who knows? You might be out there and find yourself in one of those pictures if you're running up and down I-95 in the middle of the country there. So check out his Facebook page. Of course, we got Big Cal's Trucking Kitchen. He was at home this weekend. We're getting back out on the road next week. We'll see what Big Cal's up to. MJ Love Johnson, Michelle, she's been out and about. Check out some of her latest posts. Cindy in Iraq, she's got a page, White Rose Pilot Car. She's been out in the southeast. I'm seeing some posts from her this week about some traffic problems with wrecks, and now she's out in the weather this week. So hopefully you're staying dry out there, Cindy, and getting around safely. But check out her Facebook pages as well. We're going to have Cindy back here soon. One of the topics that she and I discussed that she wanted to bring forth on the podcast was just talking about maneuvering around these giant oversized loads. Even in a four-wheeler, I'm uncomfortable when you get around them because you just don't know where they want you. And she'll come back and talk a little bit about what they're trying to accomplish and what you see the maneuvers, because it's not just a one-man band with the truck and the giant payload, but it's also the various pilot cars and different folks who have their role to play. So understanding what they're up to and how that may guide you in how you should be maneuvering around them as well. So we'll bring her back to talk about that. I hope you enjoyed the interview with Chris, and our prayers are with him this week for a favorable outcome. We'll stay in touch with Chris as the story moves on. Be sure to reach out to us if you'd like to be on the program. Message us on social media. Email us at inbox@channel19experience.com. And there's also a contact form on the website there. Just click it, throw your information in there, and it'll send an email over to me. Nominate your friends, nominate your enemies, nominate total strangers. We'll talk to anybody over here if you haven't figured that out already. If you like what you're hearing, tell us. If you disagree, I mean, I'm trying to pick a fight here. Somebody's going to have to get after me on one of these topics and disagree with me. I can't be right all the time. I'm going to get a big head over here. And that's the last thing mile marker Mike wants to hear is basically me claiming validation for all my positions because none of y'all want to debate me on any of them. I didn't get a chance to test anything. I was so busy at Matt's, I didn't get a chance to do live streams and play around with it. I just kind of got lost in the moment of wandering the show and talking to people. So we'll continue to get that on the slate here at some point. I think we can have some fun with it. It's going to be a challenge, right? Figuring out, obviously, it's going to be a limited audience because not everybody can just park their trucks at Tuesday at 7 p.m. and say, the heck with it. Let's just talk to Channel 19 Experience. But we'll get what we can. We'll record it. We'll get it out there. I'm going to need a moderator. So we'll see what my wife's up to. See if she wants to moderate y'all. Up next week, we've got an interview with the Feathersons scheduled for this week. So we're going to talk to them. Check them out on social media in the meantime. A really cool family. All of them out on the road together. Husband, wife, son. And I'm really looking forward to talking to them. They do a lot of great social media content, both, laid back, but also business side stuff. Some of their experience, whether that's with breakdowns or challenges, but also the good side and vacations and some of the fun they have too. So it's a really entertaining, lovely group of people. So check out their social media and then you'll get to meet them a little closer next week. Also, Tiara, I hope I'm saying that right, also has a page of her own, Tiara Featherson on Facebook. So check that out. A lot of interesting topics that she posts as well. I'm usually chiming in there too because they're really interesting and intriguing for me to discuss, especially about mindset and how to get ahead in this business and in life. So really a great page to follow too. I'm going to clean up a little bit of the mess I started with my air quotes right way to truck discussion from week 6. which also means I need to be ready to unveil the Channel 19 Experience encouragement cards. I told you I was going to get under someone's saddle eventually, and if the money line didn't do it today, Danger Dave and Mile Marker Mike have assured me that the Channel 19 encouragement cards will accomplish the mission. So look forward to that here in the coming week or so. So like, follow, subscribe, leave us a review, send us a comment, share with your friends. Thank you for listening this week. I hope you're enjoying the podcast. We'll see you all next week. We've got work to do.
This has been the Channel 19 Experience. If it's about trucking, we're talking about it. All uncut. The wild stuff, the weird stuff, the mistakes, the memories. But we talk about the world of trucking today, too. Everything from legislation to lane changes in the industry. We got it covered. Thanks for listening to the show. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back at the ranch soon, but in the meantime, hit us up on social media at Channel 19 Experience and the website at www.channel19experience.com. That's channel and the numbers 19. See you down the road.